All right, so in the years following Napoleon, we have the concert system, as we talked about, the conservatives trying to keep Europe the way it's always been. But as in everything, we're going to see certain groups start to challenge the concert of Europe. And so obviously, let's talk about the Congress of Vienna and all the things that happened there. A lot of people weren't really big fans of it. A lot of liberal nationalist people, didn't get taken care of at all, right? These people in Vienna didn't want to have these new groups, have any rights or anything. They were really kind of scared about it and honestly underestimated people. They thought they were just, dumb people with pitchforks versus being the smart, intelligent royals of the time. And really, we see that, but we just see a balanced state for a very long time. We talked about the unification of Germany in World War One as the last time balance really gets kind of changed or upset in this time period. Now, the Congress of Vienna isn't the only Congress that happens. There are a whole bunch of different times that these people get together, try to figure out different ideas of collective security, ways to back each other up, all throughout this time. And their whole goal is to define and monitor the status quo, right? How they want to keep things to be. And then on top of that, how do they also want to, make sure that no other group kind of comes in and starts to change things in Europe? You kind of see how they're being depicted here in different places, and different rulers are being depicted within Europe at this time. Obviously, you see certain ones being depicted as stronger or better than others. Especially where you see who's getting stomped on down here in the bottom, right? Gotta love these little cartoons, don't you? And remember, public conservatism, and you guys are doing this as part of your isms projects, but remember, we are trying to react to those the liberals who develop at the time of the French Revolution, and those who are afraid of violence and that kind of stuff coming in. And a lot of the conservatives have support from the ruling classes, and some actually support of the peasants too, because in some ways, some of these revolutions kind of backfire on the peasants and make things worse for them. Look at France, for example. I mean, they kind of got hosed when it came to the French Revolution, when it came to the peasants. And so also the Romantic writers kind of come in. They talk about order and faith and tradition. That's where the peasants come in too, and that idea that tradition is a very, very important part of life at this time. Now, we're looking at this whole idea here of history as a continuum, right? They kind of thought that history stayed the same, over time, right? And that society is organic. There's always going to be kind of this, connection or this ranking as we go. It's not a contractual situation. They kind of totally took away the ideas of Locke and Rousseau in terms of social contract, and this idea of we want to try and be stable, long time there. The idea of good society is about stability and keeping things the same for a long time. It's really kind of hard to look at, right? I mean, God and history, the only right way is that you kind of show political authority staying in place. They took away all ideas of enlightenment, of the social contract. And, they looked at the idea of individuals and natural rights as being more of a problem than of a benefit. And we talk about self-interest, especially the liberals and Adam Smith. They thought that this was a bad idea, right? They thought that, you have to have kind of one for all for one, all for the king. And you kind of saw from Europe before this, that it's a very hierarchical society. You know your place, you do your job, and that's kind of where it sticks at. We really see the first change to this, though, early on. This first change actually happens in Latin America. You have the United States up here, and notice all these different European colonies, mostly Spanish in origin, are breaking away from the empire. And Spain kind of being the, kind of the collapsing man of Europe at this time, we kind of have it to where these colonies start falling apart. And notice in the 1820s, 1825s, to up to 1830, Spain loses a lot of their colonies. You see the United States answer in kind with the Monroe Doctrine, and some of these countries losing a lot of their power that way. Some of these ideas are going to kind of move over to Europe as well. We're going to see revolutionary movements happen in places like Madrid early on. Okay, and they get put down pretty fast. See them in Piedmont, Sardinia, and Naples. You see them happen in Greece and Russia. The ones we're going to focus on going forward. Okay, the first big one is in Greece, though. Okay, so you have Welcome Moldavia, these Danubian principalities up here, and this is part of the Ottoman Empire. And Greece are going to try and break away from this. Obviously, Greece has a long history to it. The Christian in origin, even though it's Orthodox Christianity, but still. A lot of the old history with the ancient Greeks and those kind of things are very important to European history. And so we're going to see this big Eastern question here. We see a lot of secret societies develop this time. And secret societies are usually nationalist in origin, and they're groups that kind of form together and talk together, especially along nationalist lines. And so Hatari Filki is a secret society that was looking for the Greeks to uprise against the Turks. Alexander Ypsilanti is kind of the big leader of this whole group, and you kind of see this idea of pan-Hellenism, Greeks working together. And so he kind of unites the Greeks together as a way to fight against the Ottomans, and they kind of get help from the British and the French and the Russians because they feel more European than the Ottomans, and they defeat the navy as they can do. Russia declare war on the Ottomans, and eventually we see Greece declares an independent nation through this whole war thing. Now remember, this is not a battle in Western Europe, so it doesn't really count towards the Congress of Vienna. This is more of a case where I would say it's more of a case of Eastern Europe and like fighting against the Ottomans, where you see these groups here fight together against outside forces coming into Europe. So that's one example of that whole group with the Greeks, okay? Obviously, you see the Delacroix here, Greece and the ruins of Mysogi, the idea of how Greece kind of rises up against the Ottomans and defeats them. Kind of a cool, good story for Europe at this time. Now we'll go to Russia and see the Decembrists. Now this is a whole other thing that happens in 1825. This is while the whole Greek thing's going on, but these Russian upper-class people had really come into contact with a lot of Western views during the Napoleonic Wars. And like other places, they've been kind of introduced more liberal ideas. They had learned more about kind of history and the Enlightenment and all those ideas that came into the French Revolution. Well, all of a sudden, in 1825, Tsar Alexander I, who was kind of a reformer in his own rights, I guess you will, dies very, very suddenly. I can't remember how it actually happens. He gets ill, but he dies very suddenly in November. Well, obviously the Decembrists called this for a reason. So Alexander's a problem. When he dies, pretty young man yet, he has no direct heir, so he has no son to take over for him. And he does have two brothers. So he has his brother Constantine, who is the elder brother who should be taking over, and he has his other brother Nicholas. Well, Constantine kind of broke the family rules by marrying a woman who is not of royal blood. He married a commoner. And so because he married a commoner, he was taken off the list and not allowed to be in line to the throne anymore. Well, with that, his brother Nicholas instead is named as the heir. And so Nicholas is very different. So Constantine was super popular with the people, more of a reformer, all that kind of stuff, less conservative, I guess you could say. And a lot of the Russian troops were really big fans of Constantine. They wanted to have him be there. Well, when Nicholas dies, Nicholas becomes the Tsar too after Alexander dies. They're required to take this oath of loyalty to Nicholas, and they don't want to. And so this Moscow regiment marches into St. Petersburg, right? And they say, we're not taking the oath because we don't want Nicholas as our person. And so they wanted Constantine instead. And so Nicholas basically has the army and the cavalry and the artillery attack this group of people and be killed. Those that weren't killed in the military engagement were executed. And those who weren't killed at all were sent to Siberia. So we kind of see this first rebellion in Russian history where it's not like, ooh, we're just going to take down the Tsar, that kind of stuff. It's like a very specific rebel goal, right? To not follow or have more liberal ideas in Russia. And so the Decembrists come to kind of have the idea of Russian liberals and looking at more change in Russia. And this Nicholas guy is going to be huge conservative and like super scared of change in this whole time. There are three big things he really, kind of look for is the idea of, we see with the Decembrists, their orthodoxy, kind of keep Russia, the idea of Russia, right? Autocracy and nationalism, three big ideas that are going to come up with this Russian uprising. And the idea of with this time period here's Nicholas. You can see him on the horse doing all this whole thing here. Russia's going to try to stay this orthodox kind of place. They're going to have the autocracy yet of the Tsar, but yet nationalism is going to be that big border thing to kind of keep that control that way. Now, other revolutions are going to pop up here now in 1830, and we can kind of blame the French for this. We use this phrase a lot that, when France sneezes, the rest of Europe gets a cold. Well, France had their big revolution, and it kind of, didn't go so hot. They're going to have another one come up in 1830. And so we'll see more in Belgium, and they're spread to Poland, all different other places out here. So post-Napoleon, you have this guy here, Louis XVIII, who is the Bourbon king, right? And he actually follows as a constitutional monarch how he rules. I mean, he observes this charter, basically this constitution as restoration period. So the power of the royal is limited. There is legislative power, civil rights protected. Napoleon Code is still there. So really, there were a lot of big changes to France's time, which probably good changes for France. Well, there are people that oppose this, and they're called the Ultras. The Count of Artois, who was another Bourbon down the line here, the next in line to the throne, didn't like this idea, okay? And obviously, after the whole French Revolution thing came up here, these ultra-royalists kind of came into power. And after they had been beaten on for 10, 15 years, we have what's called the White Terror. And the White Terror is when all these royalist mobs went around and just started killing all the former revolutionaries. I mean, they were getting their payback for the guillotine and all that kind of stuff. And so these royalist groups who believed in the monarchy and wanted the monarchy to stay started killing all the bourgeois third estate people and started getting rid of them. They did have this election, right? And the Ultras actually were rejected as trying to, take over that election. When they won the election was kind of just kind of pushed aside, if you will, for more moderate, royalty majority, depending on the middle class support. So we start seeing the royalists kind of throw back here against this, and we start seeing a big split again when it comes to France. I mean, we have the Duke of Berry, so the son of Artois, who was going to be the second line to the throne, is murdered, and royalists blame the left blames the royalist, and so Louis XVIII, already kind of starts moving the government more and more to the right, seeing attacks on the royalists as being part of that. And so he starts, changing electoral laws, starts putting more and more censorship on stuff, and the liberals who were in politics start getting driven out and pushed away. And so it seems kind of this whole idea of reactionary force. In fact, 1823, when Spain starts revolting against the Bourbons, France is allowed to send troops in and lay the smackdown on those guys. When Louis XVIII dies, we have Charles X, who was the former Duke of Artois, and so he basically really wanted to try and bring back more of the royal power to Europe, to France again. So really, he wanted to have lessen the influence of the middle class. So really take away the power of that bourgeois group. You public money to pay the nobles, and the clergy goes back to education. You have orthodoxy in terms of old school church education, and really not having the same voting rights that a lot of liberals wanted to have. And so we start seeing France start going backwards kind of 1830 rolls around. And so he started working on the 1814 charter, which was that constitutional monarchy system that France was ruling on. He limited the press and what they say. He got rid of the Chamber of Deputies, which is basically the French Parliament, right? So kind of like, we think about back to England and James I and that kind of stuff, right? And he started putting all these ultra-reactionary members into his ministry to kind of bring power back to the monarchy. And so when they had the elections in 1830, another big group of liberals won, and he just dissolves Parliament and starts kind of taking over again. And French people, when they do this kind of stuff, they're like, well, when this happened last time, what did we do? Let's revolt. So, again, we revolt. And so the middle workers, students, middle class took to the streets of Paris and the streets of big cities, barricaded them, and had a revolution again. Because when things go bad in France, we go to the barricades, plain and simple. Here you see, here's Delacroix. He's a famous writer here showing Lady Liberty of France leading the charge here right against the man, right? And making sure you put them down. And so when this uprising happens, okay, with his 4 ordinances from Charles X, who's right here, okay, Charles X has to abdicate. He basically leaves the throne in fear of being killed by the Paris mobs, and so instead, their compromise is going to be a bourgeois king from the Duke of Orleans. He was in line of the Bourbons. He was by the name Louis Philippe, okay, who said, yep, I'll be king, I'll abide by the Constitution, all that kind of stuff, and become essentially the citizen king. He's going to be a king who is not going to be a royalist, a king who's going to be there, if you will, for the people. And so he, really hadn't worked with the alters a lot, even though he was really a bourgeois kind of person. He was kind of along with the bourgeois class, even though he was truly in the Bourbon line. So you try to make sure that kind of liberal reforms started happening with censorship being abolished, and you had bring more and more people into voting rights and that kind of stuff. And he kind of talks with by the will of God, not the will of the people, not the will of God. Kind of that social contract comes in, and so he even makes the French tricolor become the true flag of France. And so now, essentially, the French government is under control of the wealthy middle class, the bourgeois. You kind of see the caricature of Louis Philippe here. Really, the government ignored a lot of needs of workers and stuff, and so you start seeing things go backwards right away. In 1832, another uprising happens in Paris. This is what Les Mis is based off of. Silk workers striked, and it was really crushed by the government. So really, he's not really seen this way as helping a lot of people. He was a lot of talk, not a lot of actual action. And it's kind of where this group called the Free Thinkers came in. It was Jean Lamarck. He was a Napoleonic hero, big revolutionary stuff like that. And he was really scared of this more conservative rule, the Bourbon line that was there, and try to have this true republic. And when he dies, the people actually revolt again. And it's kind of his last example of violence from our July Revolution in Les Mis. And people say that Victor Hugo kind of is very romantic with this revolution. He kind of exaggerates it's a little bit and everything, but it's still there in terms. Now, I talk about when France gets a cold, everyone else, sneeze, everyone else gets a cold here. So here's Belgium, and this is what Belgium looks like, this whole group here. And in the Congress of Vienna, Belgium was given to the Netherlands being part of Holland. Well, they start following, and they felt that the whole Congress of Vienna didn't really work in terms of Belgium and getting along with Holland. And so there are these really big, wide cultural differences in this idea of this United Netherlands. So, the northern group here is very Protestant, very seafarer, very trading, as we've seen with the Dutch for a long time, whereas the Belgian areas were more French, more Catholic, more farmers, individual workers, and didn't really have a lot of that same idea. So the people in the south here revolt, and they adopt their own tricolor. Notice the Belgian tricolor here, and they revolt against the Dutch, and they revolt against the rulers who were there, trying to say they should have their own country. And they do. They get their own country, 1830, eventually break the country up into two and have their own thing. Poland does the exact same thing, where we argue it's one of the bloodiest areas where, Poles and around Warsaw, kind of saw this special status with the Russian Empire and the Congress of Vienna, and they wanted a bunch of things, right? They got this local autonomy grid in Warsaw, but the rest of the Poles were still under Russian command. And so the Poles really didn't like Nicholas. He tried to force, Russian stuff on everybody. They got this whole romantic, revolutionary feeling going on here, and rumors kind of filter through stuff, and sometimes rumors end up causing more problems than anything, that Nicholas was going to use Polish soldiers and send them to France and Belgium as part of the whole Congress of Vienna, right? They'd either have one group rebels, we're all going to kind of come in and help you put the revolution down. And these people, Poland were like, this is bullcrap, man. I mean, you're holding us down. They're going to take our soldiers to hold other people down? That's not fair. And so all these little Polish secret societies that developed at this time start rebelling. The secret societies would meet in secret, discuss the topics of the day, talk about how they feel things are going wrong, and so they start rebelling. And so here's our Polish rebellion, which is really kind of funny. You think it could have been more successful if they were together. And Poland notoriously hasn't liked to work together on issues. Instead, all these little secret societies kind of did their own thing. Some were more moderate, some were more radical. And the Poles kind of thought that the French and the English would come back them up. They thought that, they were going to try and take Russia down that way or back them against Russia, and it'd be great. It just didn't. And nobody showed up. I mean, it was almost a year of fighting between the Russian army and the Polish that Nicholas eventually puts down the Polish rebellion. What's really funny about it is that you think about it, Belgium wouldn't be a country if it wasn't for this. By the Poles rebelling, Nicholas never actually answered Holland's call and sent Russian soldiers to Belgium. So, hey, in a way, Belgium can thank the Polish for rebelling when they did. So here's Europe, 1830, right? We see a few things changing here. We have a new Belgium, okay, with revolting here. We're seeing a lot more questions here. We have a question in Poland about revolts taking place here. We see a few in Italy, and we see a new country of Greece formed down here as well. And we're going to see more of these things start kind of start stewing for the next 15 years until 1848, when we see a lot of rebellions start happening all over Europe. So, what are the results of these big things? Well, you know what? The concept of Europe kind of worked. I mean, it's kind of keeping things together in a way. The conservatives did not reverse all forms. Obviously, the idea of French Revolution, revolutionary spirit, liberalism are still very alive in Europe. They're not really keeping it down too well. People are still talking about in secret, but still talking about it. And this whole idea of liberalism was start challenging the conservative plan for a long time. The idea of, free trade and free elections, all that kind of stuff, is really start looking at this whole here. And, notice that revolution was successful in Western Europe, and it's because they had, more support, middle class led, aided by the urban lower classes as well. They kind of had those groups kind of fight here. I mean, 1830, you could argue that the French Revolution in 1830 kind of worked. The Belgian Revolution worked. The Polish did not, because they did not work together, right? The Belgians and the French were more united in how they were fighting, and that's the only way they had done that. And so I really see a lot of middle class here. The workers did a lot of fighting, and a lot of revolutions left a really unsatisfied working class, though, because the ones who benefit from this are the middle class. They got the jobs in government. They got the rich jobs that were there. They got the free trade. And all the riders who had fought and bled and all that kind of stuff were left doing nothing. And we're going to start seeing this working class get more and more unhappy. And that's where we're going to see the rise of socialism and more the radical kind of things happening, like, guys like Marx come along in the end. That's it, guys. Thanks for listening for 20 minutes here or so. We have more about revolutions to talk about all this week. Thank you for tuning in, taking some good notes, and I'll see you guys in class.